still remember that terrible noise, the insane screeching, the shrill screams of people in mortal fear, the certain death in front of me.
On Christmas Eve, 1971, 92 people boarded a plane in Lima, Peru. Their destination was Pucallpa, a 1-hour flight. Only one of them would make it. She was 17 years old. Hey guys, Jared here. This is the story of Juliane Koepcke, a teenage girl who survived a fall from a disintegrating aircraft into the heart of the Amazon and walked out 11 days later, alone. But surviving the fall was only the beginning. How did she survive a 10,000-foot drop with no parachute, no training, and no warning? What deadly creatures did she encounter in the Peruvian rainforest?
Everything wants to eat you. Everything wants to consume you.
And how did she navigate through the thickest jungle in the world? To understand what Juliane was up against, we spoke with Anthony Giardenelli, CEO of Odorongo Expeditions, a seasoned Amazon naturalist who's spent decades studying its ecosystems and its dangers. On Christmas Eve, 1971, Juliane and her mother boarded LANSA Flight 508 from Lima to Pucallpa. Just over 25 minutes into their flight, they hit heavy turbulence. They were flying headfirst into a storm. And then, in a flash of lightning, everything changed.
At that moment, my mother screamed, "This is the end." And exactly what happened after that, I can't say.
What Juliane didn't know in those final seconds was that the aircraft wasn't simply going down. The fuselage had begun to tear itself apart mid-air, scattering passengers and debris across 9 square miles of jungle, while the plane was still airborne.
This machine was like a toy in the clutches of a furious, unleashed nature.
And then, she was no longer inside it.
And then all of a sudden, I was outside the plane. I was suspended in midair, still in my seat. It was not so much that I had left the plane, but rather that the plane had left me.
Juliane began free-falling toward the densest jungle on Earth. Her mother was no longer by her side.
The only sound I heard was the wind howling in my ears, and the forest was spinning below me.
Now, you may be thinking to yourself, how the hell did she survive a fall like this? Well, it was a bit of physics and a lot of luck.
But I had no time to be afraid, because apparently I lost consciousness.
Experts believe the row of seats she was strapped to spun around like a helicopter, providing some air resistance. And the warm updraft from the storm may have slowed her descent. But the trees also played a big part.
The descent through the canopy and the understory saved her ass. She probably would have died on impact if she landed with the seat directly out of the end.
I fell through this thicket and then, relatively softly, quote-unquote, struck the ground.
The wild thing is, Juliane wasn't the only survivor of the crash. Well, at least initially. We'll get to what happened to the rest of the passengers later on in the episode.
I suffered a very serious concussion. I couldn't raise myself without fading away again.
Juliane was in pretty bad shape. Her left eye was swollen shut. She had deep cuts on her arms and legs, and a broken clavicle. But that's not all.
As I learned later, I also had a torn ligament in my left knee. I had no idea. Later, doctors in Germany said that wasn't possible. You can't walk with that injury. I was completely unaware that I had it. There was no pain at all.
When your body goes into survival mode, adrenaline kicks in. It can help suppress pain and even increase your strength and endurance. And for Juliane, it kept her moving. But she had no glasses, leaving her nearly blind. One sandal, a thin mini dress, and an Amazon rainforest that was already working to kill her. She could hear planes in the distance. A search team, maybe. But the jungle canopy made it impossible to see anything from above. No signal fires were possible either. The rain had soaked everything. She was on her own.
There's nothing to eat. There's no shelter. Everything wants to eat you. Your hypothermia sets in. For people who don't know anything about the jungle, it's the same damn thing. You might as well be dropped off in the middle of the ocean, because there's nothing for you there. Nothing at all.
Now, you may be thinking, hypothermia? I thought the jungle was hot and humid.
If it's not raining, if you don't have any way to keep your heat in at night, you can go into hypothermia in the forest. There's so much humidity in the air that it's basically like you're swimming. So even if it's not raining, you are in direct contact with a soup, and that soup is going to sap your heat out. So hypothermia is possible in the jungle as well. And it's really surprising she didn't get hypothermia.
To stay hydrated, Juliane licked droplets off leaves until she found a muddy stream. Delicious. And now, muddy streams like this can carry pathogens and diseases, but it was a risk she was willing to take.
If you get sick, you're gonna have a hard time. You're gonna get weak and maybe even succumb to some illness to the point where you can't even walk.
Although her next obstacle was finding food, she had other priorities in mind. Finding her mother. As she moved through the jungle, she found some debris from the plane. She came across a bag of candies and a Christmas cake covered in mud. She tried to eat the cake, but was so disgusted by it, she tossed it away. Yeah, I don't blame her. I mean, I've never been a fruitcake guy myself. At one point, she came face to face with a bird-eating spider. A spider that eats birds. They looked at each other and went their separate ways. Now, thankfully, this variety wasn't dangerous to humans, but guys, I would have completely lost it. The Amazon is full of fruits and animals, but without her glasses, well, distinguishing safe from deadly was next to impossible. One wrong move is a death sentence, and Juliane would come terrifyingly close to that later. As time dragged on, she still couldn't find her mother. She knew she had a tough decision to make. Keep looking or find help. She continued hearing planes overhead and made a game plan. Rather than stay by the wreckage where she was covered by dense foliage, she decided to follow the sounds of trickling water. She remembered the advice her father told her when she was a child.
Here I have learned how important it is to find water if you are lost in the jungle. A small creek leads to a larger one, which eventually takes you to a river where you can find human habitation and help.
She came across a small stream. If it led to a river, it would be her best chance of being seen. She had one thing on her mind: getting out as soon as possible. Sadly, the planes never saw her. After a few days, they stopped searching altogether. Still, Juliane didn't give up hope. She managed to get by, one day at a time, but it wasn't easy.
Nights were the most difficult. It either rained ice cold or I was bitten to pieces by mosquitoes.
In an effort to stay warm and dry, Juliane used large leaves to cover herself and sought shelter under thick tree trunks or along slopes.
There were often times I wanted to give up, but I continued on regardless.
To avoid accidentally stepping on a snake barefoot, Juliane led with her one sandal. At least that way she had some protection. Or did she?
No matter what boots or snake chaps you have on, if you are in the wrong situation, you manage to piss that snake off and get bit, it's gonna bite above your waist anyways. So your foot is nothing.
And it wasn't just the animals she needed to worry about while navigating through the jungle.
Although you gotta really use your eyes and watch where you're walking. Aside from that, you're stepping on spiny palms. Everything that grows there has some sort of defense to keep things from hurting it, climbing on it, eating it, and it's usually in the form of spines or poison.
At one point, she considered catching a frog to eat. It was the rainy season, and she knew there were poisonous dart frogs everywhere. They could make her really sick, but not enough to kill her, like the golden poison dart frogs native to Colombia. Still, they were too fast for her to catch, and it's probably a good thing too. On day 4, she heard vultures and saw them circling overhead. In her childhood, her mother, who was an ornithologist, taught her all about the birds of the jungle, and she knew exactly what this meant. The birds led her to 3 passengers, still strapped into their seats, driven headfirst into the ground with such force that half of each body was buried in the dirt. At first, Juliane was afraid one of the victims was her mother.
And I turned one of the feet over and saw that the toenails were painted. And it then became clear to me that this could not possibly be my mother, because she never painted her toenails.
The Amazon is a death sentence for most people, but thankfully for Juliane, it was like a second home. Her parents were zoologists. At 14, her family relocated to the Peruvian jungle to conduct research. She grew up alongside caimans, vampire bats, poisonous spiders, and venomous snakes. But here's where this story stops being a tragedy and starts being something else entirely. It never should have happened. In the years before Christmas Eve 1971, LANSA had already been responsible for 2 separate fatal crashes. And yet, the Peruvian government kept its operating license active. Locals had a saying. It translated roughly to, "LANSA lands on its belly." Juliane's own father refused to let them book the flight. He knew the reputation, but with no other options available, they boarded anyway. 92 people. An airline with 2 fatal crashes on its record, and a government that looked the other way. That's not bad luck. That's a decision someone made. And 91 people paid for it. Now, before we go further, if this is the kind of story you're here for, make sure you're subscribed and hit the bell. On day 5 or 6, Juliane heard the sounds of birds yet again. But these weren't vultures. It was the call of the Hoatzin, a chicken-like bird native to the Amazon which lives along bodies of water. She followed their calls and came across a large river. Although she had found water, the dangers that lurked beneath were also something she knew she had to be cautious of. So she entered the river and started moving, but this was not a casual swim.
In the water we have electric eels, who are territorial and aggressive. We have piranhas, we have anacondas, we have caimans. The anacondas and caimans would definitely look at you as a meal if they were big enough.
I always carried a stick and poked the river bottom ahead of me because there are a lot of poisonous stingrays in the muddy shallows of the river. Stingrays are the really dangerous animals of the jungle, of these rivers. Much more dangerous than the poisonous snakes, jaguars, and tarantulas, which people generally fear.
And if you're wondering about piranhas, they're only dangerous in standing water, so they weren't really a concern for Juliane. At one point, she heard the cries of baby caimans. Then she saw the mother, rising from the bank, moving toward her. Rather than panic, she slowly slid back into the water and held still, showing she wasn't a threat. The caiman stopped. It worked. Now, these were likely spectacled caimans, a less dangerous variety.
Black caimans are the ones that can get 14 feet long, and they look at humans as food. The spectacled caimans will max out around 8 feet, and they're not going to really see a large human towering over as a prey item.
Still, Juliane's instinct to stay calm and back away slowly is likely what led her to avoid a serious confrontation with the mother caiman. Each day, she continued to float down the river and would go to shore at sunset to rest, but sleeping was impossible due to the pain she started to feel from the insects feasting on her wounds.
I had a wound on the back of my left upper arm, where flies had deposited their eggs.
At risk of blood disease or losing her arm due to other forms of bacteria and parasites, Juliane knew she didn't have much time. And the second-degree sunburns she suffered while wading through the river all day added insult to injury. After several more days, she rested on a gravel bank. Things weren't looking good. And then she saw a boat. She thought she was hallucinating.
I slowly approached it and touched the boat, and it was real. At this moment, I became wide awake, looked around. Where are the owners? There was no one there.
Juliane crawled up the riverbank on all fours. It took her hours. And then she saw a small hut. Although no one was inside, she was certain it was only a matter of time before someone returned. She remembered a trick her father used on a wounded dog. She found gasoline from the boat's engine and poured it directly into her cut. One by one, the maggots surfaced.
In total, there were 50 maggots, each about 1 centimeter long in my arm. Amazing. I managed to pull out around 30 myself.
She grabbed a tarp, laid down on the sandy riverbank, and later wrote it was a better sleep than any 5-star hotel. By the morning, there was still no sign of anyone coming to the camp. Juliane came to terms with the fact that she may die here without anyone knowing what happened to her. And then, she heard voices. It was 3 forest workers, Beltran Paredes, Carlos Vasquez, and Nestor Amasifuen, who, by chance, decided to go back to their shelter.
That became my rescue. They told me later that they hadn't intended to go there at all. They just checked on their boat every 3 weeks.
Wow. Talk about lucky. They cleaned her wounds and removed the remaining maggots, fed her, and took her on an 11-hour boat ride back towards civilization. Juliane asked about the other survivors. The men went quiet. No living passengers had been found. She was the only one. This confirmed her worst fear. Her mother was gone. As they reached civilization, local villagers were taken aback by her blonde hair and bloodshot eyes.
They mistook me for a water spirit. There is a legendary figure called Yakumama, the Water Mother.
But her journey alone had finally come to an end. She was then flown to a missionary hospital where she recovered for months. But she still needed closure about her mother. Juliane directed search teams to the crash site. On January 7th, 1972, they found the first pieces of wreckage. The next day, they uncovered more aircraft debris and 20 corpses. But the full story of what happened to the passengers of LANSA Flight 508 is darker than the crash itself. Forensic analysis of the bodies recovered from the jungle told investigators something devastating. Juliane wasn't the only person to survive the initial impact. Multiple passengers had survived the fall. They were alive, conscious, and waiting in the jungle. But they reached them too late. On January 12th, Juliane's mother was finally identified by her father, despite serious injuries to her face. He knew it was her by her distinct feet. Forensic investigators believed she, along with at least 11 others, survived the crash, only to die in the jungle over the following days. Years later, Juliane teamed up with filmmaker Werner Herzog to make Wings of Hope, a film she credited with helping her overcome her trauma. Believe it or not, Werner almost got on the same flight as Juliane while filming 1972's Aguirre, The Wrath of God, but a last-minute cancellation kept him back.
I was booked on this plane, that's why it's important for me. And by a chain of coincidences, I was taken off the passenger list.
Now, Juliane didn't run from the jungle after this. She returned to it. She earned her doctorate in biology, became a mammalogist specializing in bats, and spent her career researching the Amazon rainforest. The place that should have killed her became her life's work. Survival isn't just about instinct. It's about preparation, knowledge, and as Anthony reminded us, the mental clarity to assess your situation before anything else. If you were in a situation like hers, you were badly hurt in the middle of the jungle, no form of communication, no tech, no cell phone, nothing like that, what's the first thing that you would do to increase the odds of your survival?
Orient myself, not only physically, but psychologically, to what you need to do to get out. Do a general check on how healthy and capable you are of even doing that.
Of course, when you board a flight, you hope you'll get to your destination without any problems. But there's always a chance things can go sideways. Check out our video on the deadliest aviation crashes next. Maybe don't watch this one on a plane. Either way, we'll look at the most important tips you should know to survive the worst case scenarios in the air or in the middle of the ocean. We'll see you next time in another episode of How to Survive.